years ago to explore to what extent households or microfinance clients have access to multiple financial institutions. So let me, before moving into my findings, just to sort of give a little bit of background how I collected data and the sort of methodology used. So basically this was carried out in 3 districts of the country, in Hambantota, Kurunegala and Ratnapura. Basically I covered 450 households in 2 periods, in 2006, 7 and 2019, to see to what extent their extent of multiple borrowing in particular has increased during this period, and also carried out a divisional level survey covering 47 GN divisions where actually I conducted the survey to see the growth of financial institutions in these areas and some interviews with multiple borrowers. So moving into the findings, so what we find is increasingly high level of multiple borrowing between by 2010, and actually there has been a rapid increase of multiple borrowing between 2006, 7 and 2019 period. So in fact what we find in the sample that multiple borrowers have more than doubled between the 2 survey periods. In some areas that we found, some households have borrowed from more than 7 financial institutions at a time. And interestingly, what we find is that the majority of the multiple borrowers, these are microfinance borrowers, they have borrowed not only from microfinance institutions but from a mix of MFIs and other formal financial institutions like leasing companies or commercial banks, and especially formal financial institutions have been accessed mainly for pawning, leasing and agriculture loans. So this in a way is somewhat different to what we generally expect, that microfinance sector and the formal financial sector in the country serving sort of distinct segments of population. So what we find is actually over time these 2 sectors have to some extent have come to some sort of convergence, and there's a considerable overlap between the clients of MFIs and formal financial institutions. So we find actually a similar picture in all the 3 districts. Basically in all the 3 districts we found that about 70% of the MFI borrowers borrowing from multiple financial institutions, with the majority of them borrowing from a mix of MFIs and formal financial institutions. And especially in Hambantota, an average MFI borrower borrowed from about 3 institutions, and about 1/3 of them borrowed from 4 or more financial institutions. There were households borrowing from up to 7 financial institutions. So we need to understand actually why multiple borrowing. So there are a number of factors. I think some of them already were highlighted by our previous speakers. So I actually look at it like some demand side factors as well as there are supply side factors. So the demand side factors that I found from my in-depth interviews with the multiple borrowers, well, basically they borrow from multiple financial institutions for various reasons, to build up a lump sum of money that they require for cultivation or micro-enterprise or some emergency, which they cannot access from a single financial institution. So they borrow from different institutions and patch together to build up that lump sum. And secondly, to have frequent access to credit, because we often know that many microfinance institutions, once a loan is given to a client, until that is paid back, actually the clients cannot access another loan. So if they need another loan, so in between they access another financial institution, and also to access diverse products, owning, leasing and so on and so forth. Also cross-financing was commonly seen, basically taking a loan to pay back another existing loans. So when we look at the supply side factors, the main reason is competition and growth of financial institutions, especially in recent years. Let me show you in the next slide. So what I found in the areas that I worked, basically the 47 GN divisions in the 3 districts, there has been a growth of financial institutions. On average, basically there was 4 financial institutions per GN division, and all the 47 GN divisions, these are randomly selected GN divisions, had multiple financial institutions, and especially in Hambantota, on average there were 6 financial institutions and many had over 10. So coming back to the supply side factors, so another thing is easy access. So I think sometime back probably microfinance clients have to travel long distance to get a loan, but now there are many microfinance institutions, some even sort of, coming to their doorstep to lend some, whether you call them microfinance institutions or easy finance companies. So it's easy access, so that is also one of the reasons. And some even use some sort of slightly aggressive strategies to promote their products. So these are some of the factors that have led to the multiple borrowing in the country. So with the multiple borrowing, we know obviously one negative consequence would be rising debt levels. So this is something that we find in our study. The debt levels of the multiple borrowers as well as the overall microfinance borrowers has increased during this period. But on average, so we use basically this debt income ratio, which we calculated as the percentage, basically the monthly debt repayment by household as a percentage of their monthly household income. So this is a commonly used indicator to measure indebtedness. So this debt income ratio, we see that it has actually increased, especially for multiple borrowers during this period. But on overall, when you take the overall picture, is still it's a moderate level. But having said that, we cannot forget the fact that if you look at the last column of the table, that there are still about 20%, close to 20% of the multiple borrowers who are actually paying every month more than 25% of their income for debt repayments. In some cases, it's actually more than even 50%. So this is kind of alarming, this situation. So in conclusion, so what I have to say is that there has been an increasingly high level of multiple borrowing in the microfinance sector, and we saw that the majority of MFI client borrowers not only borrow from microfinance institutions but also from formal financial institutions. So from the financial inclusion point of view, this is something that we can consider as good news, but increasingly high level of debt raises some issues of concern and concerns over the likelihood of over-indebtedness among MFI clients. So there are a number of measures that we probably will have to take, and some of the areas that we need to focus, I think the previous speakers also highlight some of them, is financial literacy, especially to help the clients to understand their repayment capacity and to understand the difference between the interest rate, the way in which the microfinance institutions present their interest. So it is something very important to help them to prevent from being over-indebted, and effective regulation of microfinance institutions, especially to strengthen the performance in MFIs and also to protect the clients in this context of increasing level of multiple borrowing. I'm actually happy to see that in the draft microfinance bill that at least client protection has been mentioned at least in one line. So the next one is also we need to have mechanisms to monitor multiple borrowing and share credit information among MFIs. At the moment, I think very few microfinance institutions like Samasa Development Bank and RBs are members of the Credit Information Bureau. So at the moment we don't have such a system. So these are some of my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ganga. I think